Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very exciting panel of Healthy versus Hype, the State of AI in Healthcare. We've got a real great group of panelists here that are actual practitioners in the art of AI or work with AI. So as I think about the audience of the 33 people that have joined, start thinking of questions as we go along. What I'm going to do is pose some questions to the panelists, and as we go through them, we will have them I'll go in a clockwise fashion and have everybody give their input, or there can be some back and forth. And then about 15 minutes before the end of the session, we'll open it up so that there can be some Q&A from the audience. So with that said, let me go around and quickly give an introduction to our panelists. Going clockwise from above me in my configuration is Dr. Lakshman Tamil. He is a professor of electrical engineering at UT Dallas, and also is one of the co-directors of the Quality Life Laboratory that works on digital health technologies, and that has been working on many areas of AI in the UT system and the research area. Then we have, technically, Dr. Danny Toby, AD/MD, from DLA Piper, which is one of our great cutting-edge law firms in town that does a lot of work in digital health, regulatory, as well as working with large institutions around town as they start deploying new digital technologies, especially AI. And last but not least is Dr. Paula Gupta, MD. She's a radiologist and a breast imager that has a 10-year experience of being in the field of mammography and has worked at Solace and Rose Imaging. Myself, I'm Ron Nog. I am an entrepreneur as well as the CEO of MedCognetics, which is also a digital AI technology company that's working on image processing and how to use that to take healthcare to the next level. So we have a great panelist group, and I'm going to jump right in and start off with Dr. Tamil. And to the whole panel is, how did each of you get involved with artificial intelligence, machine learning in healthcare? And to what extent do you interact with that technology on a day-to-day basis, or even in the way that you plan out to use it? So Dr. Tamil, why don't you go ahead first?
So 15 years ago, I realized that the cost of healthcare cannot be skyrocketing this way. And the only way that the healthcare can scale and be available fairly to all the population in the world, more than 7.3 billion, is that we have to add artificial intelligence to this. And that's what led to the starting of the laboratory, Quality of Life Technology Laboratory, where we investigated and built and developed many AI-based machines, from sleep assessment to heart health to the next generation platform for telemedicine. All of these things were being developed, and some of them are deployed.
Interesting. How about you, Danny? How are you working with AI today?
So I am a practicing lawyer, and about half of my practice is AI in the healthcare space. As Ron mentioned, I went to medical school at UT Southwestern and practiced law in the biotech area. And probably about 10 years ago, my clients started asking more and more about artificial intelligence and what the regulations were and rules were around it. And I began researching it and realized that there were no rules around it, not well-developed ones. So I began writing and researching on the issue and helping develop frameworks. And that really culminated in 2019. I worked with the American Medical Association to help them put out their policy on AI in healthcare. And so now a large part of my practice is working with both large pharma and medical device companies and also startups on adopting AI.
Fantastic. How about you, Paula?
Well, I've used a CAD program, computer-aided detection, pretty much on every single mammogram I've ever read. It's a program that came out more than 20 years ago. The goal was for it to kind of function as a second reader in the interpretation of mammograms. And it did okay. It did. We definitely did see an increase in cancer detection with it, but it did have some downsides. It wasn't very specific. The things that it was marking weren't very specific for breast cancer, and so it ended up the radiologist would spend a lot of time kind of reviewing areas, kind of increasing the interpretation time of studies. But also it led to a lot of false positives. So a lot of women would have to come back and, get extra imaging, maybe get a biopsy to kind of clear whatever that CAD program had initially marked. So overall, it unfortunately didn't meet the expectations of the breast imager.
Well, interesting, because Paula, that really brings up my next thought about, as we look at the title of this session of healthy versus hype. What's going on, Paula, that is healthy in AI today? Has it been helpful, or is it going to be helpful? And, we'll take it the other way around, Paula, Danny, and then Dr. Tommel.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think it's actually a really great time for AI. I think there's a lot of curiosity from physicians on how is AI really going to help change the way I deliver healthcare? And I think there's a lot of curiosity from patients as well. A lot of almost novelty, like, oh, my imaging study is going to get read by a computer now. But in terms of a radiologist, I think the number of studies that we're asked to interpret every day is just skyrocketing. I think with radiology technology advances, the number of images per study, that's skyrocketing. We have millimeter thick slices, we have 3D reconstructions, we have breast tomosynthesis, we have different window levels to view different parts of the body. I mean, the amount of data that we're kind of asked to see and synthesize is just astronomical. And I think that's where computers, the AI algorithms will really be able to make an impact.
Wow, no, it sounds like there is quite a bit of opportunity going on and can help you immediately and your workflow and your patients. Danny, what are you seeing as you look at different deals and everything else that's going on that you see working in AI today?
When it's done well and right, increasing sensitivity and specificity, and those are concepts that, as lawyers regulating, they don't teach sensitivity and specificity in law school. They really should, because lawyers deal with false positives and false negatives all the time in our trial system, in our criminal and civil jury system. But as an MD, JD, I think about it all the time because it's important to FDA's regulation of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And they definitely want to know what the sensitivity and specificity are, and they want to know compared to what. So, a lower sensitivity and specificity are tolerable when you have a situation where the next best alternative for patients is poor. But if it's an area where humans are doing a pretty good job, the bar is much higher. Another area where AI can succeed or fail in healthcare is equity. So Dr. Abramoff, who was the founder of IDX, and I just put out a paper in the American Journal of Ophthalmology talking about we should look at sensitivity, specificity, and equity. How are those measures of accuracy doing across different racial and ethnic and gender and other groups, and let's make sure that there's not inherent inclusion or exclusion bias that's baked into the algorithm and hurting as much as it's helping in some cases.
That's a fantastic term, equity, because being a technologist, if you bring something to look like a octagonal stop sign and then you go to Europe and it's a circular one, you can throw off a car from stopping. So yeah, there's quite a bit of that system bias that we need to think about. Absolutely. Dr. Palmer, what are you seeing in your world as working in AI, as you've done various projects on various chronic illness?
So one of the great advancements in the recent times, recent means in the last 10 years, is the deep learning. Deep learning is a great contribution to artificial intelligence. But the problem with the deep learning is it is non-linear, and the humans have no understanding about it. So if you are a doctor and if you have to look at something and say, why the way that this is what I'm going to prescribe to you, or this is the action I should take, he has to have a reason for it. And the problem that we have today is the human understanding of these machine learning models. And there's a lot of work being done, and we have to achieve success in this in order for us to take this artificial intelligence to the next level. And there is another important thing that Danny has already brought about, that is fairness. This is extremely important, and it is a serious problem. You would have heard about this, the credit score. And when people from different races applied for credit, the algorithm rejected a particular race and say that there is a bias in things we build, and that's not acceptable in creating a fair society. So the algorithm, the AI that we build, should be accountable, and also it should be fair. And lastly, it should be trustworthy. That is very important. Trustness in these machine learning algorithms are also very key to the success of this whole field.
So that's an interesting thing you talked about, trustworthy, and that being very key, because the other part of this whole session is about hype. What is really working out there? What is not working as advertised? Everything is AI. AI is going to fix your golf score. It's going to whiten your teeth. It's going to do so many things. What is it really doing? You know, there's a lot of promise on genetics. We hear about AI doing genomic sequencing for COVID, many things. But Dr. Tommel, if we go around this way from Dr. Tommel and Danny and Paula, what do you see is not really working as advertised, or as a misnomer? How about that?
What is not really working out as advertised? I think that we are only chipping the tip of the iceberg. We haven't really have made systems that we can fully trust at this point. So, but we are into that, and we will in the next decade, even well before that, in the next 5 years, we will have systems. And again, before those systems can be deployed, also we have to go through all the rules and laws that all have to change. For example, when we apply this AI in automated driving, then if the driver meets with an accident, who is responsible for it?
Right.
Do you hold the driver responsible for it, or the company who built the algorithm? Same thing will come for the AI in healthcare too. If you create an algorithm to predict something, and if the prediction was wrong, who should be held? The doctor using the algorithm should be held liable, or the company that built the algorithm should be liable, or the people who provided the data to build the algorithm should be liable. And there are a lot of things that need to be worked out before that can be successfully deployed. But it doesn't mean that I'm not skeptical about it, because we are winning one after another in achieving this. AI is here to stay, and I can bet on AI. And AI is good for the humankind, and this will bring an equitable healthcare and other services to the mankind. Otherwise, without it, serving 7.3 billion people all over the world to lead a healthy and a happy life will be difficult.
Well, thank you. One of the things that I kept hearing, and this is such a wonderful panel because it makes it easy to lead one to the next. I kept hearing liability, 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 and I'm looking at Danny. everything that Dr. Thomas said is very true, but what are you seeing from your part of the world of, as you said, half your business is in digital health and AI digital health, especially in e-commerce?
Yeah, I see a lot of people really trying to get it right, which is reassuring. That there are really good people out there thinking hard about the questions of liability and responsibility. And I mentioned IDX, which is a client, but a couple of years ago, I wrote a paper that everybody thought was crazy because I said, these companies, when they reach the level of fully autonomous AI, where a human isn't permitted to override the machine, then at that point, those manufacturers should think about taking out medical malpractice insurance. And it was an idea that was a little bit controversial. But the same year, IDX came out and testified before the FTC and said, we have medical malpractice insurance because we are stepping into the shoes of the doctor. And it's one thing if it's an assistive technology. And so, I mean, Dr. Gupta and Dr. Tamil, know better than I do that when you look at any diagnostic that has imperfect sensitivity and specificity, you look at the totality of evidence and you look at their pre-test probability and you look at all the other clinical exams and history and you think, okay, I'm going to ignore the device or I'm going to follow the device, but it's not dispositive. But when you get to the point where the machine is overriding the doctor, it's not fair to put that responsibility on doctors. And I've seen manufacturers be very open and understanding of that. And it is a design choice. I mean, early on, you kind of have to decide, are we autonomous or are we assistive? And then we have to design to that level of responsibility.
No, well put. And this is something that I think as a physician from your world into Paula's is that, Paula, you must see a lot of, vendors coming to you saying assistive or diagnostic or, this is going to help. When you cut the chaff from the wheat from some of these tools or methods, what are you seeing coming out? Because both would,
I mean, I think that it will really, I think it needs to really be an assistive device. I think that radiologists and physicians, we do a lot besides just interpret the imaging study. There's a lot that we collaborate with other physicians. As a breast imager, a lot of my time was spent counseling patients, doing physical exams, and just kind of teasing out tidbits of medical history to kind of figure out what's going on. And the AI algorithm, however good it is never going to get to that level. That information is not present on the mammogram. So I think there is a lot of fear amongst radiologists that, oh my God, these computers are going to take over. I'm not going to have a job in 5 years. I really don't see that happening. I think that we are, in my opinion, I feel like we're very far away from that point in time.
Okay, well, good to know. And Paula, you bring up the next question that I have, and last question for the panel before we go into some questions real quickly. From what you're seeing now to the next 5 years, people talk about decades, but AI is moving so fast. I just wanted to get even a 5-year window from this panel on what do you see happening in the next 5 years in your world moving forward?
Yeah, I think that there are going to be more and more AI programs kind of coming into health, to mainstream healthcare. As physicians get more comfortable with it, patients get more comfortable with it. I think it's going to free up a little bit more time of physicians so that they can spend more time on, some of the more complicated cases and more complicated patients. But there are going to be a couple of challenges. I think there needs to be some regulations regarding like data acquisition, storage, how we're protecting patient data. And I think there needs to be some sort of discussion about like reimbursement. It is an additional data set that the physicians are reviewing. and how is that going to be taken care of? You know, is it going to be a CPT code? You know, our insurers need to get involved, Medicare, Medicaid, all that stuff.
Gotcha. Danny, what do you see on the event horizon 5 years out?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like if I gave you an answer, I'd be disingenuous, because one of my favorite stories is back in I think it was late 2015, Oxford University surveyed several hundred of the world's experts on AI and asked them when certain milestones would be accomplished, and one of them was when AI would beat humans consistently in the game Go. And I can't remember the exact average answer, but it was years and years and years out, and then maybe more than maybe decades, I don't recall. And then it happened, within like 3 months, and,
Wow.
and beat the world's expert 4 out of 5 games, and he actually quit playing because he said there was no point anymore. He wasn't the best.
Wow.
So, I mean, Moore's law is out the window. I mean, things are more than doubling very, very quickly. I mean, I have talked to really smart people at some of the best AI shops in the world, at Google and places like that, who say we're nowhere near general intelligence. And then I talk to other people who say it's going to happen before you know it. I don't know the answer. I don't think anyone knows. But right now, in the next couple years, I mean, I see it staying in its lane, which is a lot of image recognition, like what the people on this panel are focused on. It's really good at that. I think matching, sorting, predicting based on data, it's really good at that, as long as you have good practices and good statistical practices. Don't overfit the data. Don't throw in a bunch of junk and expect good answers. But I think we'll be surprised too at what happens and how quickly.
Oh, excellent. No, very, very, very much the case. And Lakshman, how about you? You guys?
Well, like Dr. Gupta has rightly pointed out, the first step in the deployment will be assistive. It will be rarely autonomous. But we cannot say that it won't be autonomous in a few decades from now. That's different. But for a long time to come, it will be assistive. And that is coming very soon. And in every area, in healthcare and other places also, the assistive AI as an assistive technology is coming. And we will be seeing very soon.
Understood. No, that seems like the next logical step. I'm going to transition this panel over into Q&A session. I see some questions coming up on the chat. Is there a sequence that you would like to pose these questions to the panelists, and they can jump in as they feel comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I would leave that completely up to you. I would just go down. I think the first question that we had was from Daniel for Dr. Danny. Beyond figuring out the liability issues, are there other public policy challenges related to deploying AI in healthcare delivery?
Yeah. Privacy obviously is a huge area of concern for AI, both because you are ingesting large amounts of data, and a lot of that is PHI and private health information, sensitive health information, and then some of the predictions you can make. If you say that someone is predisposed to a certain disease that they'll likely get within the next 5 to 10 years, what's that going to do to their insurability, to their employment? So there are some regulations in place already to help with things like that. There's the GINA, the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, and that covers genes and some other biomarkers. But what about if it can predict it from the number of steps you take a day and what perfume you wear, and all kinds of strange correlates that we're seeing pop up. So privacy is huge. We talked about discrimination. The law appropriately takes a dim view of discrimination, and what we're finding is there's lots of different ways that discrimination can get into AI. Sometimes it's you know, I mean, Ron's example is great. You know, the octagon for the sort of a cultural bias in the programming. You know, but translate that to healthcare. If you train your dermatology app on only white skin samples, and then an African American patient comes in, you might get a misdiagnosis of benign versus malignant because you had unrepresentative training data. So FTC, other agencies are focusing in on that quite a bit, and there's some legislation that would empower them even more to do that. And then biometrics, of course. There's facial recognition. There's all kinds of new rules about those that are popping up at the state level and eventually at the federal level.
Oh, great. So great answer to a wonderful question. If I go up the screen like you mentioned, Yvonne has a few, but we'll pick off the first one that she started off with, and maybe Dr. Tomel, you can jump in, asking about what about predictive and proactive AI used in healthcare, like the prediction of an affliction coming or an onset of a medical situation.
Yes, definitely it is coming. A lot of work is being done in this, and it is extremely useful because if we could predict, then we can take action to diminish the effect of it, and an early action will save the people. So predictive analytics are a lot researched, and predictive analytic software well written, and they will be available.
Great. Then I see one here that I think I'd like Dr. Gupta to comment on. This is from Sarah, and she says, there are a lot of things that radiologists shouldn't do that AI should do. With silver tsunami, both radiologists and AI will be needed to meet the demand. So are you seeing things like this, Paula, where eventually in a section of your world will go pure AI, but you're still going to be around for a ton of other things?
I mean, I think it will happen. I think, like Dr. Tomel was saying, that it will still be a few decades, down the road. I think having the physical exam skills, the clinical history skills, I think will play a role in just the total healthcare that can be provided to a patient.
Okay, great. Then I'm just going back up to get a sample of things here. We did talk a little bit about the privacy part. Let's talk about here. There's what Ty is mentioning is all of this is based on the availability of data. And how is the legal system changing in regards to sharing data to make it possible for these AI systems to reach their full potential? And I'll add to that. How do you have that? How is this going to evolve to have equity in data as well? So any thoughts to the panel, or Danny, there's some of this with a legal angle here too.
So that's a big conversation that's going on right now. And about a month and a half ago, time blurs in the pandemic, we got some final rules that have not gone into effect yet, or they're not being enforced yet, but by the end of the year, on information blocking. And so data democratization, data accessibility, those are concepts that the individual and the patient really should have ownership of their data, and the right, certainly, to the portability of their data. So if I go to one doctor and then I want to go down the street and get a second opinion or be in a different network, I should have an easy, convenient way to get my data and move it with me. And so the information blocking rules make it impermissible for healthcare providers and companies to basically put up obstacles to that. And there's also some other interesting requirements about standardized APIs so that different devices and apps can interface with each other more easily. And I think all that is good. I think most people on most sides of this debate are coming to the consensus that people should own their own data and be able to take it with them and have some control and autonomy over what happens with that. Not everybody's on board with that view, but I think with time that'll be the prevailing view.
Okay. I've got one for the panel. I'm going to combine a couple that actually sounds is about how does AI in your minds, and one of you guys answer it, is take into account the differences in humans and humanity, be it in genetics, heredity, walk of life, exposure to pollution, dietary, lack of sleep, stress, all these things that are going on all over the world very much right now. Yeah. How is AI taking these into account besides this pixel looks good and that pixel looks bad, like we were talking about in just image processing? So anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I think it's all about collecting that data and kind of feeding it into the AI algorithm, right? It's all about data collection and drawing some inferences on lack of sleep, increased stress levels. Down the road, what does that cascade into? But it's really about the data collection and training the algorithm to take into account those factors.
Okay, great.
I think too, it's a very good tool for hypothesis generation. I mean, some people, worry that AI is the death of the scientific method because you're just throwing everything plus the kitchen sink into the algorithm and coming up with a model. But in a lot of instances with people I've worked with, that's step one. And so you might throw in zip code and food stability, proxies for food stability, other social determinants of health, and see what seems to be a meaningful variable. And then from there, you can go back and actually test it rigorously and see where the interventions are. So I'll put a plug in that just because AI is wonderful and can see patterns doesn't mean we're giving up on confidence intervals and randomized trials.
Excellent. And here's another one. There's a lot of talk that it's directed towards, I see this in my world too, about, and William writes this one, do most general liability and E&O insurance policies exclude the coverage of AI products? And as AI data privacy and AI consulting services grow, how are they going to be covered? We touched upon that in like the malpractice insurance and all, but is there some overall trend that you're seeing? I will just make the answer in one way to the audience, is that the FDA looks at AI right now as software on a device, meaning it's software running even on a computer blade in a server. They look at it in a very device-oriented way, and they look at a lot of the rules and regulations as in device liability. But really, we're evolving into a software as a service or a consultative type system and service. So how are we going to evolve?
Yeah, there's a lot of good questions in there. So I mean, certainly FDA has a couple categories. There's software in a medical device, which is one thing, and then there's software as a medical device, or what they call SAMD. And that, I mean, I think that distinction illustrates, Ron, what you were saying perfectly, that there is this evolution of the software itself is the medical device now because it's making clinical decision support or medical recommendations to treat or diagnose or mitigate disease. So it's not just driving the device anymore. And those are separate categories for review. In terms of insurance, I haven't personally seen any global trend towards carve-outs. But I have seen specific instruments for software liability. And to your point, again, Ron, it's important whether it's software as a product or software as a service. I cited a case in one paper where the dispute about coverage actually came down to that. Well, what were they doing? Was it a service or was it a product? And of course, with the insurer taking the position that there was no coverage because it was the wrong one. So those things do matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our session. It's been wonderful discussion. I leave more encouraged than discouraged. And I wanted to thank the time of Dr. Paula Gupta, Dr. Danny Toby, and Dr. Lakshman Tamil. And to the audience, at one point I saw a very nice large attendance. I really appreciate your time and supporting Dallas Startup Week. It's important that entrepreneurial ideas and innovation continues on, regardless of the environment that we're in. So appreciate everything. And Trit, anything else that we need to cover? But thank you for Dallas Capital Factory for helping out and getting us all together as well. Really appreciate your help too.
Thank you. Yeah, so afterwards, send you guys a thank you email. And then if you guys are interested in receiving the recorded session, there'll be an email address in there that you guys can request your copy as well. But thank you to y'all. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to the audience.
Stay safe.
Really great. Stay safe, everybody. Stay well. Be well.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.